Hello, viewers of The Story of Me and You. When a story has slept for 5 centuries, the very first task is to wake it. Gently, respectfully, yet unflinchingly. Tonight, under the amber glow of a single desk lamp in London's Royal College of Physicians Library, I hold history's pulse between my fingers and feel it flutter, feebly, furiously, achingly, back to life. Underscore, 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 underscore. A brittle hush blankets the reading room. Dust hangs in the air like suspended snowfall, shimmering whenever I move too quickly. I'm here to exhume the forgotten terror the tutors called the sweating sickness, an illness so swift, so savage, it could steal a healthy man's breath before the church bells finish tolling noon. My heartbeat pounds, audibly, insistently, as I crack open a leather-bound ledger dated 1551. On its first crinkled page, a physician's terse Latin reads, Sudor Anglicus, mors in tempestiva. The English sweat, death untimely. I take a slow, deliberate breath, almost imagining the scent of cold sweat mingling with ink. Something about those two words, mors in tempestiva, slices through the centuries. It forces me to concede that the fear, the grief, the raw bewilderment that once stalked England's lanes are not past emotions. They are living echoes, aching to be heard. Across from me sits Evelyn Price, the archive curator. Her silver glasses catch the lamp's light like tiny lighthouse beams. You'll find Dr. John Caius particularly visceral, she murmurs, her voice both tender and tremulously proud. Ong se de bak si John Caius viet rat chan thuk de ko noi jong vua diu dang vua run re vi suk dong. She is right. Caius's notes drip with urgency. He counts the dead not as numbers but as neighbors. William the cooper, Margaret the baker's wife, Thomas the stable hand who laughed heartily at sunrise and lay rigid by sunset. There's a breathtaking intimacy in his panic. In cramped, hurried script, he pleads for divine mercy and natural philosophy. In the same harried sentence, I pause, fingers trembling ever so slightly. How do you investigate a crime whose culprit left no fingerprints, only phantom shivers? Science offers competing theories, hantavirus, anthrax, relapsing influenza, but none match every cruel detail. Climate historians point to damp summers thick with rodents. Psychologists note the collective dread after decades of civil war. The truth remains stubbornly elusive, shimmering like a mirage just beyond empirical reach. Evelyn clears her throat, breaking my reverie. Mind the spine, she cautions softly. 500 years is a long time to carry grief. Gunya ge sak ni kon hak ke. Nam tram nam gan noi dao da du nang roi. Her words strike me, quiet but thunderous. This investigation must not only parse data, it must honor human fragility. I jot a promise in my notebook. Tell their story, not just their statistics. And I realize, in this very moment, that our documentary is really an intersection, where medical mystery collides powerfully with the universal longing to be remembered. Underscore, 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 underscore. A sudden mirror to our present reading further, I find Caius describing the illness's cruel velocity. Symptoms erupt between the first bird's song and the baker's third loaf. The line lands like a punch. In our own century, buffeted by COVID-19, Ebola, SARS, those rhythms feel eerily recognizable. The past is no static museum piece. It's a fierce, flickering mirror reflecting how precariously we, too, inhabit our bodies and our certainties. I close the ledger gently, almost reverently. The lamp flickers. For a fleeting, disquieting heartbeat, I imagine footsteps. Frantic, echoing, desperate, racing through the corridors of 1485, chasing any rumor of a cure. Then silence. A silence swollen with every voice history forgot to archive. Underscore, 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 underscore. Setting our course, tonight marks the genesis of an 8-part quest. We'll follow the sweating sickness from royal court to peasant cottage, from London's damp alleyways to the misty fens of East Anglia, hunting fragments, letters, parish rolls, skeletal remains, even lingering folktales. Along the way, we'll meet virologists, climate data sleuths, ethicists, and descendants who still whisper family legends at the dinner table. Together, we'll ask, what truly happened, and why does it still matter? Before leaving, Evelyn presses a folded map into my palm, ink smudged, lovingly restored. Start in Shrewsbury, she advises, eyes gleaming with hope. Some of the first outbreak graves lie there, forgotten beneath the elder trees. I thank her, voice hushed but warm. We'll bring the lantern, I whisper. We'll make sure they're not alone in the dark anymore. Forgotten gravestones, unforgotten names. Will carry us to Shrewsbury's shadowed churchyard at dawn, where blades of grass still bend beneath the weight of stories untold. There, among lichen-stained epitaphs, we'll search for the outbreak's earliest victims and the genetic clues their bones may yet reveal. Stay with us. Their heartbeat, however faint, is leading us onward. The town of Shrewsbury still smells like river mist and old prayers. Cobblestone streets wind around half-timbered houses, their windows clouded by time. It is here, beneath the shade of overgrown elder trees, that the first whispers of the sweating sickness once turned into screams. According to local records, this is where the 1485 outbreak may have started, quietly, almost politely. A blacksmith named Elias Wright collapsed in front of his forge one morning, drenched in sweat, muttering the name of his daughter. By sundown, 6 more were dead. By week's end, the bells of St. Mary's Church rang so often they nearly cracked. I stand before a moss-covered gravestone, illegible now, its edges eaten by time. Next to it is Dr. Alex Fenwick, a medical anthropologist from Oxford. He bends down, brushes away the dirt gently, and speaks like someone in church. This, he says, could be one of the first graves. But even if it isn't, someone loved is under this stone. That matters. His voice cracks ever so slightly, not from drama, but from quiet, unresolved grief. You realize then that this isn't just about pathogens or pandemics. It's about people, about names we've let fade. The church, records, echoes on paper. Huddled inside the old stone rectory, we unroll a series of fragile parish death registers. The ink has bled, but you can still make out patterns. Clusters of names vanishing within days of each other. They appear beside strange notations like mortis sudoris, or simply sudden. What strikes hardest is the age column. Most were young, between 25 and 40, often listed as in good health. A few deaths even include quotes from family. One reads, "He laughed that morning. He begged for water by noon." Even on paper, the despair clings like a second skin. A modern glimpse through ancient bones. Fenwick leads us to a shallow dig site behind the church, where they recently uncovered a cluster of 6 graves without coffins. The arrangement, hastily buried, shallow, unmarked, matches what 16th-century physicians called emergency pit burials. Bones are lifted gently into cradles of cloth. One skull, remarkably preserved, still shows a full row of molars, suggesting the person was young, likely under 30. A DNA test is underway, though Fenwick is cautious. The virus doesn't leave scars on bone. We may never confirm cause of death. But, he adds, we can confirm a life was lived here and ended too soon. Beyond data, the emotional terrain. Later that evening, we meet Ellie Rowe, a Shrewsbury local who claims her family has passed down the story of the sweat for generations. Her great-grandmother would whisper of a cousin who burned from the inside in 1485. Ellie walks us to the back garden of her home, where an unmarked stone sits beneath ivy. My father said we don't talk about it. But sometimes silence is the loudest grief. She leaves us standing by the stone, and we do not move. For a long time. The parchment is yellowed, edges curled like burnt paper. On its surface, the ink has faded to brown, but the emotion in the handwriting roars, each letter sharp, urgent, almost trembling. The date reads, August 3rd, 1551. The author, Dr. John Caius. The sickness comes not like a thief, but like fire, leaping from house to house, heart to heart. I see men laugh, and then I see them drown in their own sweat. Caius was not a mere observer. He was inside the storm. In Cambridge and Norwich, he walked from bedside to deathbed, charting symptoms with the obsession of a man fighting both ignorance and time. He described the illness as a 3-act tragedy: sudden dread and chills, a torrent of heat and sweat, then a collapse so complete the soul seemed to exit without a scream. Most victims died within 6 hours. In the British Library's Rare Documents room, we sit with Dr. Isla Marin, a medical historian who has spent over a decade decoding Caius's private correspondences. Her fingers trace the Latin phrases like a musician returning to an old, painful song. What's heartbreaking, she says, is not just that Caius documented the disease, it's that he believed no one was listening. One letter to a fellow doctor ends simply, They fear not death, but shame. For to sweat was to be seen as cursed. The church versus science. We learn that Caius had to negotiate not only illness, but the church, which often dismissed his work as heresy. He was once barred from entering a Norwich chapel, accused of bringing fear upon the faithful. Still, he persisted. In 1552, Caius wrote a boque or conseil against the disease called the sweat, an astonishing early attempt at public health strategy. He outlined steps we now recognize as quarantine, hygiene, and environmental awareness. A man lost to history, Dr. Marin, shows us a faded woodcut image. Caius in a long black robe, holding a ledger and looking downward, not in defeat, but in exhaustion. She whispers, "He gave his life to naming the nameless. But history remembers kings, not the men who catalog the dying." We leave the library in silence. The sun outside is bright, but the world somehow feels dimmer, because we now carry not only knowledge, but the burden of remembrance. The rain in East Anglia is not like the rain in London. It doesn't simply fall. It soaks into everything: soil, wood, skin, memory. There's a silence to it, a heavy hush, as if even the sky mourns something it cannot name. We're standing in what used to be a wheat field near Thetford, now a wild meadow. In the 1500s, this area was part of England's breadbasket. Dense villages, fertile land, livestock grazing between rows of barley. But in the year 1528, the sweat came here, and everything changed. We meet Dr. Thomas Aldridge, a geoepidemiologist, beside a shallow riverbank where the earth seems perpetually damp. He points to a cluster of moss-covered stones, barely visible among weeds. "Those were boundary markers," he says. "They date to the mid-1500s. Around here, people stopped burying their dead in churchyards. The ground was too wet, and the bodies were too many." He shows us soil samples from the area. Under microscope, the sediment layers reveal evidence of frequent flooding, especially between 1480 and 1550. Those floods weren't just natural disasters, they were biological time bombs. Dead animals, human waste, stagnant water, the perfect storm for disease transmission. Especially something airborne, or rodent-borne, the rat theory. For years, historians leaned toward blaming rats and fleas, citing the Black Death. But Aldridge says the pattern here was different. It moved faster, too fast. Whole villages were wiped out in days, and there were few reports of visible buboes or boils, which the plague usually leaves. Instead, he posits a more elusive culprit, a virus carried by rodents, activated under certain climate and environmental conditions. He nods toward the wetlands around us. The land got sick, and so did everyone who walked on it. Voices from the mud. With help from a local archaeological team, we visit a former cottage site now submerged seasonally. Using ground-penetrating radar, they've identified at least 3 structures and dozens of shallow graves, and most had no markers. Inside one burial pit, the remains of an adult and 2 children lie side by side. Their skeletons are intact, curled as if caught mid-embrace. A shard of pottery nearby reads simply, "Lord, make it quick." Even in death, the plea for mercy lingers. A people forgotten by time. That night, we speak with Sarah Pennington, a farmer whose family has tilled the same fields for 12 generations. In her barn, she keeps a box of odd things found while plowing. Pins, bones, broken rosaries. She hands me a folded cloth scrap, water-stained but preserved. On it, stitched in rough hand, are the words, "We do not know the name of the wind, but we fear it all the same." I run my fingers across the faded thread, heart aching. These people didn't die nameless. We just stopped listening to their names. The building is quiet, too quiet for a place where so much life is being examined. We're at the Ancient Pathogen Laboratory at the University of Cambridge, where silence is sacred and gloves are mandatory. This is where the past gets unpacked. Not in volumes or letters, but in fragments of marrow, in microscopic whispers that only a centrifuge can hear. The science of the silent doctor. Lena Chow, lead virologist and genomic archaeologist, meets us in a sealed, climate-controlled chamber. Her eyes, sharp above a surgical mask, sparkle with quiet urgency. "Bones don't lie," she says. "They forget almost nothing. You just have to know how to ask." She shows us a femur, thin, fragile, and labeled Shrewsbury_1529_M5. It came from the same shallow burial site we visited in Part 2. For months, her team has been extracting ancient DNA, aDNA, from the bone's core. hoping to find traces of something viral. A glimpse of the invisible results begin to surface on her monitor: colored bands, genetic sequences, rows of code. They don't speak in clear language, but to Lena, they are confessions, written in protein. There's no certainty yet, she warns, but we're seeing fragments, something close to hantavirus, but older, wilder, less stable. If confirmed, it could mean that the sweating sickness wasn't a flu or plague or spiritual curse. It was a virus, real, mutable, and possibly still lingering in some form, the ethical dilemma. But unlocking the genome of a forgotten virus raises a question: should we? Dr. Chow paused. Knowledge is power, but knowledge is also responsibility, she says. What happens if we recreate something we don't fully understand? Yes, her hands hovering over her keyboard. Her team now debates whether to publish the genome fragments publicly or restrict access. In a post-pandemic world, where scientific breakthroughs can both save and endanger lives, every answer births a dozen new questions. A voice from a distant death. Lena invites us to listen to a digital reconstruction, a sonification of the DNA sequence translated into sound. A series of soft, haunting tones emerges. It's not music exactly. It's more like memory. One tone rises, stutters, and breaks, then silence. She looks at me and says softly, "That could be the moment the virus mutated. That stutter might have been someone's last breath." Remembering forward. Before we leave, Lena hands me a sealed vial, not with a sample, but with a note inside. It reads, "To know is to carry. If you tell this story, carry it with care." I nod. This story is no longer just about the dead. It's about us, our choices, our fears, and our responsibility to the memory of those who didn't get to choose at all. Not every story from the sweat ended with a grave. Some ended in silence, in rooms that stayed dark long after the fever passed, in hearts that beat on, but never beat the same again. Surviving wasn't living. We traveled to a quiet village outside Ely, where a faded wooden house still stands beside a crumbling chapel. Here, with the help of parish archives and local historians, we uncover the records of a woman named Marjorie Bell, documented as one of the few survivors of the 1528 outbreak. Her recovery was considered miraculous, but the notes quickly turned grim. 6 months later, Marjorie began exhibiting what the records called melancholia of the spirit, a 16th century phrase likely describing severe depression, hallucinations, or PTSD. Her husband, child, and 3 siblings had all died within 48 hours. She was found talking to the walls, one priest wrote, and when asked what she heard, she replied, "The ones who didn't finish saying goodbye." The curse of the immune. We meet Dr. Samuel Archer, a physician anthropologist studying the physiological impact on sweat survivors. He shows us skeletal remains of 2 individuals labeled as recovered in parish documents. Their bones tell a hidden story. Survivors often suffered lasting damage, he explains, joint deformities, tooth decay, in some cases, signs of neurodegeneration. The children who remembered, in the Finland Museum, we find something extraordinary. A child's diary, kept miraculously intact through centuries. The author was Thomas Ludlow, age 12 in 1551, who survived the sweat along with his mother. I asked Mother why I could not cry. She said the tears are inside now, and they will come out when I am old. The boy grew up, became a baker, married, had children of his own, but the last page of the diary, written in his adult hand, reveals the lingering wound. I have never liked the heat, not since it came for us. Survivors with no song. At a small stone church in Littleport, a wall bears the names of those who died in the plague years. Flowers sit at its base, candles flicker gently, but on the side, carved faintly in a separate stone, is one word: remanent, Latin for the remaining. No one knows who carved it, but it stands as quiet testimony to the ones who walked away, scarred, altered, forgotten. The psychology of memory. Modern psychology confirms what the survivors never had words for: that trauma can be hereditary, carried in behavior, emotion, and even biochemistry. Generations later, their descendants still avoid heat, fear, fever, wake from dreams of drowning in sweat. We often think of memory as something stored in the mind. But what if some memories live in the blood a whisper in the genome? At the Epigenetics Research Center in London, a place that smells faintly of ethanol and old electricity, we sit down with Dr. Naima Farouk, one of the leading scientists studying the connection between trauma and genetic memory. She opens her laptop and shows us a series of genome maps, color-coded sequences with subtle mutations, all traced to individuals from Finland, many of whom can document ancestral ties to sweat-affected villages. What we're seeing, she explains, isn't a mutation caused by the virus itself. It's a chemical echo, a change in how certain genes express, likely triggered by extreme stress or trauma. These genetic switches, known as epigenetic markers, don't alter the DNA sequence, but they do determine how that DNA is read and how the body responds to fear, heat, fever, or grief. One of Dr. Farouk's most striking studies involved participants from 3 families in Norfolk. Though unrelated by blood, each had ancestry in parishes with high sweat mortality. Their descendants shared heightened cortisol levels, lower fever thresholds, and a peculiar symptom, panic during humid summer nights. It's like the body remembers, she says softly, even when the mind doesn't. A young man in London. To understand how this research touches lives today, we meet Callum Wexley, a 28-year-old musician who's battled night terrors, heat sensitivity, and chronic anxiety since childhood. Callum had no idea his family came from a sweat village until a genetics research program traced his mitochondrial DNA to Wisbech, 1546. His reaction wasn't disbelief, but relief. It made sense, he says. The heat panic, the insomnia. I used to think I was just broken. Now I know. I'm remembering something no one talks about. Memory, or myth. Not everyone agrees with the science. Some critics warn against genetic determinism, saying it's dangerous to link emotion or illness to ancestry, but Dr. Farouk says that's not the point. This isn't about blame, she says. It's about compassion for what our ancestors endured and for what their descendants carry without even knowing why. The ghost in the genome. At the end of our interview, Farouk shows us a rendering of a genetic sequence, one believed to be from a sweat survivor. She calls it the ghost strand. In it are patterns of stress resistance, inflammation control, and strange silences, gaps no one can explain. Maybe it's not what the genes say, she murmurs, but what they refuse to say that holds the truth. The wind in Shrewsbury sounds different now. Maybe it's just the season, or maybe we've changed. After 7 parts of unearthing forgotten graves, decoding ghostly genomes, and listening to the unspeakable, we return here, not as seekers, but as witnesses. What do we owe the dead? In the stillness of St. Mary's Church, we lay 3 handwritten cards on the altar. One for Elias Wright, the blacksmith who collapsed in part 2, one for Marjorie Bell, the survivor whose spirit never recovered, and one left blank, for the thousands whose names we will never know. Your stories live in us now, I whisper. A few candles flicker, outside school children pass by the gate. A woman leaves flowers. Life goes on, but not without them, not anymore. A conversation across centuries, back in the Cambridge archives, we revisit the ledger from part 1. Its pages no longer feel ancient, they feel personal. On a hunch, I add something, a letter, tucked between the pages of John Caius's notes. To those who fought, feared, and endured, we see you now, we name you now. What you suffered taught us how to listen, and because of you, we will remember better. Sometimes honoring the dead isn't about candles or stones. Sometimes it's about answering them. The living legacy. We return to Ellie Rowe's garden from part 2, where ivy still curls around the unmarked stone, but this time there's something new, a wooden bench. On it, someone has carved, "For those who stayed behind and carried the silence." Ellie appears at the door. Her eyes are wet, but her smile is real. "You did what they couldn't," she says. "You finished the goodbye." The thread through time. We've spoken to doctors and historians, farmers and descendants, priests and scientists, but more than anything, we've spoken to a truth we can no longer ignore. The past does not disappear. It waits, and it asks us, will you carry it, or will you let it die again? A last word. As we edit the final sequence of this documentary, I think of something Lena Chow told me in part 5. To know is to carry. We've carried them, their names, their fears, their unanswered questions. We've given them room in our voices. And maybe, just maybe, that's all history ever asked of us. And you, if you've come this far, through the dust, the silence, the sorrow, then the echo lives in you now too. So carry it. Speak it. And when someone asks what happened, tell them they were here, they mattered, and we remember.